Okay, let's try it again. Third time's a charm. That looks better. I think OBS was freaking out. Now is everybody able to hear my audio? So it looks like it should be working on my end. Awesome. We're good to go. So how's everybody doing? So we got Emily, Scott. Good to have you guys hanging out with me in the first week. Yeah, so we're going to be doing probably do a little bit of an intro to some of the camera stuff in Maya. I think pretty much as a whole, this class has been doing really well with the activities for the first for 1.1. Like, seems like everyone's moving around the 3D viewport pretty well, which is fantastic. So it's going to make things pretty easy to talk about with you guys. So if you want, as I'm kind of going through this stuff, there's a little lag, from what I'm saying to when you guys see it in the stream. It's probably like about 10 seconds or so. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to type them in there. I'll try to answer questions and do demos on different things as we're going through this stuff. But yeah, I think our main goal here is to talk about this stuff in the first week. So I'm just pulling up the documentation, and we're all pretty good with the first part. Not too concerned about that. And honestly, even with the other one, getting into activity 1.2, this one's also going to be, I think, fairly straightforward for you guys. It's really just a discussion. You do a little bit of research on cameras. We're going to have you look into like how a camera works, more just like how it captures light, the different effects you get depending on, shutter speed values, how focal length is going to change, perspective. I have a bunch of cool videos down here as well, getting some different types of shots. Now, the camera stuff that we're doing, though, is still going to be relatively simple. This is really good, too, by the way. If you guys check out that Dive Deeper, Mike Brown's playlist that I've set up has so many cool things in here that really, I think, break down how cameras work and how you can set up a really nice composition with such like simple techniques and ideas. So I would highly recommend checking that out. If you like his work, I definitely would subscribe to Mike Brown's channel as well. I'm a big fan of his work. Uh, but yeah, simple discussion. Not too concerned about this guy. I think you guys will be good with all this. Just a little bit of research. The one we're all going to be talking about today, though, is going to be 1.3. So now that you guys have got a little acquainted with Maya, we want to jump in here, finally work on some new projects. So the main thing we want to do for 1.3 is we're going to download the 3D assets. It's just a little zip file. There's going to be 3 different Maya files in there, and watch through the different videos. It's going to explain how the cameras work. This is basically what we're going to be talking about today. Aspect ratios, clipping plane values, different tips and how we can use the viewport. And if we have a little bit of time near the end, I may do some slightly more advanced stuff, like getting into camera animation. I'm not expecting you guys to do this because it's the first week you've used the software, but I think it could be fun for you guys to see how we set keyframes, animate cameras. And I may get into a couple things that we're going to be going over in week 2, just to get everybody excited. But the main idea here is we are just trying, or when you're done with all your cameras in the different 3 Maya files, you're going to be saving them out and you're turning in just the Maya files. So you're not submitting images or anything like that. I'm just going to go in there, check out your Maya files. I'm going to look at your cameras, see how close you got to matching the reference. You guys still can hear me, hopefully? I know, Scott, you said the feed dropped out. It looks like it's still healthy on my end. I'm looking at the stream on YouTube. So there could be a little bit of a lag occasionally if the connection's kind of poor, but hopefully it holds up for everybody. If you need to, you could always refresh the YouTube page and just see if that kind of updates it. I've had to do that a couple times where just refreshing the YouTube page itself seems to fix the issue. All right. So what I'm going to do is look at the files that you guys are downloading. So for 1.3, one thing too, actually, before we even get into that, is just how we're going to organize everything. So hopefully what you guys have been doing in your previous classes is you probably have stuff saved in like your documents folder. And I would recommend inside of that setting up a folder for each class if you're already not doing that. So in here you can see I got like a CAN 115-0 folder. And inside of that, excuse me, I'm setting up all these subfolders for every activity. So like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, etc., all the way through the month. And inside of that is where we would maybe keep like the downloaded files. If we're working on different Maya files for a turn-in, we'd save it inside of there. If we're gathering reference images, I might put that in the folder as well. So we're really just trying to keep everything we're working on in one location. So for this one, when you download that zip file, what you're going to get is something that looks like this. There are going to be, actually not quite this many. I have a couple duplicates here, but you're going to be getting 3 Maya files. One of these is, for me, is a .ma. One is a Maya .mb. This is a Maya ASCII and Maya binary. I guess for all purposes right now, you can sort of think of these as the same thing. They're a little bit different in how you can open them. One of them has the ability to be opened in like a text edit. You can change some coding inside of the Maya file. But you have 3 different Maya files. And the other thing here is we have reference images. So we have a couple with one of our projects, just matching some camera angles with the Nefertiti head. Got some with the vehicle. And so our goal is for one of the files here, you're going to try to get as close as you can to matching this composition. And then for the vehicle, same thing. Can you guys get a new camera to have the same composition as these? So it's a nice challenge just to sort of force you to try to be very specific to where you move a camera. So it's a lot of like very delicate viewport controls, like getting used to alt, left, middle, right mouse button, trying to get it as close as you can, looking at like the shape, looking at negative space around the object, and just seeing if you can get a really close match. Now you'll notice I only have images for 2 of the files in here, but the environment is not shown for reference, and that's because the environment project, I really just want you guys to have fun, go in there and create your own cameras. I'm not really giving you many guidelines for that. I do want you to make sure you're aiming at the balcony in the environment, but aside from that, I'm letting you guys decide what type of composition you want to do for it. So let's jump in here and do this. So what I'm going to do, I've got Maya 2019 already open, and I guess we'll just open it right from here. That should be fine. So I'm going to do File, Open. You also notice that, of course, Open has a shortcut. You can do Control O. We also have Open right here at the top. So this is New Scene, Open Scene, Save Scene. So we'll just do Control O. And then I'm going to back up, and we're going to navigate to the folder that we saved everything in. Oh, not 1.1 and 1.3. So here's all my files. And again, I have some duplicates here because I have them saved with a couple versions. You guys have the ASCII version, not the binary. Now, the reason I do have this binary one on my end is we've had a couple issues where some students with the ASCII, for some reason, aren't able to save it properly when they're done. So if for some chance, anyone watching this video, if you run into a problem where you're having issues saving the scene, just reach out to me, and we'll try to get a workaround going. But sometimes if you do a file save as and just change the file format from like ASCII to binary or binary back to ASCII, one of those will probably work and it'll save fine. But we're just going to move forward. Let's go into the character. So this thing is going to take us a little bit to load. The character project it's pretty big. At the bottom, I got a little error right there. It doesn't mean anything. It happens a lot when you have files that are from like different versions of Maya. All these little weird hidden nodes and things inside of the scene from like previous versions that kind of hang out, and occasionally they'll throw little errors where it's like looking for a plugin or there's some random utility node from something in another scene that doesn't currently exist in this Maya. Most of the time those errors don't mean anything. In this case, that isn't going to affect anything at all. So we're good to go. Now, the interesting thing here with the character, like if you even look at the cube, I mean, you can tell this is a super dense cube. I mean, earlier when you guys were making your poly primitives, you were doing something like this. Like this was your cube that most of you were making. It's like basically a 6-sided object. This is way denser. A lot of different faces in here. So if I go to face mode, you can see this is made up of a lot of different pieces. And it gets even more terrifying when you click on the Nefertiti head. So watch your eyes here. Click on that thing, and it just lights up like a Christmas tree. So this is made up of way more information. And it's kind of one interesting thing about this too is where this feels very like structured and organized because you can see that each face is four-sided. So this is called a quad. If you look at the head and zoom in, you'll see that these are not quads. These are made of triangles. So these are all tris. And the reason this looks a little bit different is because this was generated through scan data. So someone didn't physically model this, like we would inside of Maya or ZBrush. This was someone with the right tools. He went into the museum and was literally scanning this actual Nefertiti head and to use that data with another software to produce this very dense mesh. So that's part of the reason why this Maya file is so big. Is just because this head has a lot of detail. You can zoom in there and get a lot of really great detail, like the cracks, bits and pieces of paint that were there have kind of chipped away, scratches all over the place. It's going to be really cool though, because eventually when you guys start creating lights, you're going to notice this really has a ton of really cool like shadow detail that forms as the light starts interacting with all these little like cracks and dents on the surface. So what we're going to do is go back here and we're just going to open up one of the different reference images. So if we open up like the character angled one, I'll just minimize the folder for a second. How do we get this and this to kind of all work together? What I'm going to do, now some of you may have like a dual monitor. If you have a second monitor, you could just throw this reference image on the other monitor and you probably would be fine. What I'm going to do is just double click on the top bar of Maya. What it's going to do is break it out of full screen. So if I hit that, we go to full screen, double tap that, we get out of it. And I just want to get it so we got a little bit of a gap to the right. And then I'm going to grab the corner, bring that in, and just do something kind of like this. So basically I can work in Maya and I can just see this thing off to the side. All right, so let's close that back. So how do we get this to match? So let's work on this one together. So if you go into the documentation, we've already done a bunch of this. I kind of skipped through some of this actually. We downloaded the zip file, get all these guys, got all the reference images. We're past this already. And here's where we're at. We've opened the file. We're checking out that, the PNG image right here. And this is what we haven't done. We need to make a new camera, rename it, fix the resolution gate. We don't know what that is yet. Change the resolution, and then try to match the composition. So let's try this out. So how do we make a camera? Well, at the top of Maya, you'll see there's a create menu. And if we go here into cameras, we have a bunch of different options. I'm going to do the first one. This is called a single point camera. This is a 2-point and 3-point. 2-point just means it's a camera and there's something else controlling it. So there's a second point involved, which is the aim. This 3-point has camera and aim control and something called up. Might show you these if we have time near the end, but we're going to do the first one. And you might be wondering, well, I made the camera, but where is it? So remember, if you go into the outliner, this is a good way to verify that you actually created something and it's there. You'll see that in the outliner list, when you did it, there is definitely a camera here, but how do we know where it's located? If you hit W, because remember W is going to translate, it's going to pop up that little manipulator, you can see it's lighting up under the stand. So if you just tilt your camera down, your perspective camera, you'll see, oh, there's the camera that we created. It's basically being squashed by the entire stand above it. So do you guys think you might know why this appeared there? Just like if I make a cube, why is the cube appearing here? It's a weird location, right? It's because if I hide, let me just hide this for a second. So I'm just going to click on both of these objects and we're going to hide it. So the hotkey for hiding things is H. So if you hit H, it'll turn dark gray. They're temporarily just hidden from our view. And you can see why things keep creating here because that happened to be the origin of the scene. So this is where that default Maya grid is just hanging out right there. So the camera just happened to be created there. It's just more of just a bad placement. You would never know the grid's there because it's covered, but that's technically where the middle of the scene is. So we're just going to move it out with translate, and let's immediately rename this. So right here it says camera 1, excuse me. We're going to double click on that so we can rename it right in the outliner, and I'm going to call this, I think it was called character angled cam. Let me see if this little error is that's popping up. That's come up a couple times now. That's nothing. All right, we're not going to worry about that. So I've renamed it. You can tell it's renamed here. And for now, we can just kind of move it back. But it might be nice to look through it, right? How do we know what the camera is going to see? So there's a couple ways to look through the camera. But I think the easiest way for you guys is to honestly just go up to panels. And I have shown this to a couple of you from the just from watching your first video in 1.1. A couple of you guys were asking about this, but right here under perspective and orthographic, you can see that we do have a couple cameras that are showing up. So the orthographic cameras are going to be the ones that were already in your scene. So orthographic is also these guys. So a couple of you have hit spacebar before, and you've probably seen this happen. You hit space, and you're like, oh, this is like 4 different viewports, and we don't, this is from the top, the front, the side. You're actually looking through these 3 other cameras when you do that. Now, if I hit space on either of these, it'll put it to full screen. So I could do space, back, go over here, space, space, hitting space back and forth. It'll kind of hop back and forth between all the different cameras. But I want to look through the new camera. That's going to be under perspective. So orthographic cameras don't produce perspective lines. Think of it more of like a blueprint, like a schematic, where you're seeing sort of this very flat, well, orthographic view from the different sides. This is more like a true camera where you get perspective lines. It's like how your eyes work. This is a certain angle of view that the camera is going to use. So we're going to pick this. Now, notice at the bottom here where it says perspective, as soon as I do this, look what happens down here. It's swapping over to that camera name. That tells you that you are currently looking through the camera. Now I'm using Alt left click, and see how it's like the rotation's a little weird. I'm sort of like rotating around some invisible thing right here in the middle. So how do I reset the camera's center point or the pivot point? We're going to click on the head. You can just click it here. And remember how we were using the F key from the first activity to sort of force the camera to zoom into something again? We're going to do that here. So I'm going to click, we're going to hit F. It's going to force our new camera to sort of lock in and zoom into that little object. And now when I do Alt left, you can see it's trying to orbit around. This is my new center point. It's just like I click on that stand, F, we're now orbiting around that, F. So F is going to be really important. So I could position it, and I could do something kind of like this, right? I'm just using Alt left, middle, right mouse. So all the basic controls. And I'm just going to kind of lightly tap through my different mouse buttons to get something maybe kind of close. I'm looking at the top of that stand. That looks about right. So right here is pretty good, right? Yeah, totally. Yeah, F is going to be your focus, right? I think it stands for focus. It might also be standing for frame. No clue, honestly. It's one of those, but F works. But when I get to this point here, the big key component of this is even when you think you get your camera lined up, see how over here in the reference, there's this like kind of grayish little box around it? How do you know what the camera is actually looking at? Like, is the camera going to capture literally everything you see in the viewport? Because like if you collapse the outliner, for example, doesn't that give you more space? So do you think just because you're like closing and expanding windows, we want that to determine how much the camera sees? That seems like kind of a crappy way to work, right? It just means you always have to have the same panels open to make sure the camera has the same negative space on opposite sides. So that's not really how the camera works. What we want to do is at the top of the viewport, you'll kind of notice a bunch of buttons here to the left of where you guys were doing the wireframe and the shaded. If you look over here, we have like the grid, which was that thing below the stand. We've also got film gate and resolution gate. So the big one that you're going to want to use this week, and probably for many of your classes here in the program, is going to be resolution gate. So as soon as I turn that on, you'll notice that something just changes in the viewport. Notice at the top, you can probably barely read that because it's pretty tiny, but it says 960 by 540. If that's not turned on, this doesn't show up here. So this is showing you that with this enabled, if you were to ever produce an image, like if you were to turn this into what's called a render, like an image of our shot, like taking a photo, it would be capturing only what you see in this space, and it would be exactly 960 pixels across and 540 pixels vertically. So this is kind of the same as you dealing with like image resolution in Photoshop, right? So you've had a couple projects in Digital Painting 1 where you were like doing like a new file, and then you had some certain dimensions that you were expected to do, like making I don't know what resolution you guys were doing any of your projects in, but like you might be doing a 2000 pixel wide landscape painting, and maybe it has to be 1,000 pixels tall, whatever it is. That's basically what this is right here. Now, even if this isn't turned on, that doesn't mean that you're still capturing everything else. This is still capturing exactly this, regardless if this is enabled or not. This is just a visual guide to show you what it's going to look like before you waste any time creating the image. So we really do want to make sure this is turned on. Now the button next to it that's turning on automatically is called the gate mask. That is just giving it this kind of gray shaded color on the outside. Again, this really doesn't affect anything aside from giving you a nice visual guide to help you really clearly understand what you're going to see. But that's it. I would recommend having both of these on though. Be careful that you don't use the one to the left. Film gate is different. Film gate is not going to be very helpful for us. This uses some other settings built into the camera. We don't really use this very often, so we're just going to stick with this guy right here. This is way easier to control. Now to the side of that, we have some other options. We have like field chart, safe action, safe title. You can turn these on and off if you want. Field chart's pretty straightforward. It's basically just like a giant grid. You can see it goes from like -12 to +12 over here, -12, +12 up. So it just breaks the scene into a grid. So if you wanted to like line things up like exactly a third of the way across, you could sort of figure out the math and figure out what line that would be on. We'll turn that off again. Here's safe action. This is going to be more important when you guys do character animation. Typically, you want to keep any key action within the boundary of this little green box right here. And then the other one, which is safe title, this is more important when you're doing text and title information. So if you're ever to do your own short and you want to have some title pop in for your intro or like your trailer, you probably want to make sure that it falls within this green box right here. It's not really a rule. It's just a suggestion that you probably do want it here because it just tends to read better that way. As far as I know, they're arbitrary. I actually haven't really looked into it. That's a good question, Scott. I'm curious about that. I haven't really thought about it as being anything that's real before. I'm going to look into that actually. But basically, this whole grid of like 12 to 12, I just find it handy just because I try to use like rule of thirds quite a bit, and this really helps me line that stuff up. But beyond that, nope, as far as I know, it's all arbitrary, but I'm sure I'm going to look this up later and find out there is some deep hidden real world value it's being pulled from. But that's a good question. So let's turn that off for a second. Our big problem is we clearly don't have the right resolution. So back in the documentation, it was saying that we needed to get this to a 720 by 1080, which is called the 2:3 aspect ratio. So 2:3 aspect ratio is just a simplified version of this. So if you imagine putting this into a fraction, it basically breaks down into those two values right there. So that 720 by 1080 or 720 over 1080 is the same as 2/3. So some not so scary math. We're going to go into the render settings to fix this. So if you look at the top of Maya, right by this little blue ball right here, you're going to see another thing that has a little gear icon on it. This is the render settings. So we're going to pop in there. And in the render settings, the first tab you're going to see is this area called comment. Now yours is going to look a little different because you guys don't have RenderMan installed yet. You're going to be doing this in week 2. So just ignore this and this section here. But on the comment tab, we're going to come down here a little bit. And you can see we have frame ranges. So if we want to do an animation, we could determine how many frames it's going to be, like 1 to, in this case, the timeline goes to 120, but we could say it goes to 120. I could push it way beyond that. We could extend the timeline to do a much more epic, longer animation sequence. We're going to keep that to current frame, though, because we're not doing animation yet. Down here, it's what camera do you want to render. Eventually, we're going to be changing that to the camera, but we can leave it just as is for now. Whoops, let me open all that up again. What you guys are looking for is the image size. So right here, here's where we get into the presets, and you're going to see this changes how this resolution gate works. So HD 540 just means it is a 960 by 540 using a widescreen resolution, which is a 16:9 ratio. So you probably, some of you may have heard of 16:9 ratios before for widescreen. But if you sort of break the numbers down into basic fractions of math, 16 over 9 simplifies to that number right there. So that's all it's getting at. Now, if you go click on the drop down for HD 540, you can see there's a bunch of other ones that are very similar. Here's HD 720. That's 1280 by 720. HD 1080, 1920 by 1080. But see how that value is the same each time? So these three, even though they have different resolutions, like this is going to have way more pixel information, so you'd have theoretically a sharper image with more detail than this one, but they would still capture the same information. So the ratio of width to height isn't changing. But if I start picking some kind of weirder ones in here, like a square, 1K square, see how it just popped? This is the same width and height, and so it's trying to generate a square aspect ratio. So they're very even. 2K square is the same thing, right? It's a square aspect ratio. Nothing's changing. It's a 1-to-1, but this is now double the resolution it was in the previous one. So the one we need is let's double check, 720 by 1080. So we're not going to use a preset. We're going to go to custom. Actually, this will change to custom automatically as soon as we change it. So we're going to do 720 for width, 1080 on height. And as soon as you do that, you're going to see this looks really, really similar to this. Now the camera's not in the right spot, but at least like the dimensions of this does feel pretty good. Now, one really important thing, it hasn't happened too much, but I want to make sure that no one does this, is if you can kind of theoretically change almost anything here in this section. Be really careful about modifying this number right here. This is a pixel aspect ratio. You don't want to change it. Now, this will change if you start messing around with these little buttons right here. But make sure when you're doing this that your pixel aspect ratio is still set to 1. Because what this does is, let me show you an example here, actually. Let's see if I can just find like an image that demonstrates of course, I'm getting the Pixel phone, the Google Pixel. This is kind of a good example, I guess. So if you imagine these being all individual pixels that make up a much bigger image, so pretend we're zoomed in really close to someone's eye. So pixels are typically square. When you change the pixel aspect ratio, you are now saying that pixels are no longer square. You're almost like squashing and stretching them to create these rectangular looking pixels. It's a really weird effect, and you don't generally want to make non-square pixels. The reason why this is even a thing, though, is because a long time ago, when we used to use like broadcast, like CG for broadcast television, like the older TVs, they would display with non-square pixels, and so out of Maya, we would have to create non-square pixel renders just so it looked correct on the television. But we're way beyond that now. This is a pretty antiquated thing that we don't have to worry about at this point. So just make sure it's set to 1. If you do it, change it from 1. Eventually what you'll notice is in week 2 and 3, you're going to start getting some really weird renders that look like they're stretching and squashing a little bit. But this is basically it. Like you're already done getting it set up. So now I can start trying to position the camera to get something really close. So we can just like tilt it. Or I'm just going to using Alt left, looking at the how I'm viewing over the top of there. So I'm kind of looking at my glancing angle. I'm also looking at the nose compared to that opposite cheek. So I can sort of gauge how much I'm supposed to be getting there compared to the reference. Like that overshoots it. But right around there, we get just a little bit of that cheek behind the nose. That probably feels pretty good. And looking at the gap on the sides, I can say, well, I need to get closer. So we're going to move that in. And what do you think, guys? Look pretty good? I think we're pretty close. So this would probably be a pretty good location. Now, once you think you've got your camera in the right spot, it's really important that we don't move the camera, because I want you to see like this literally is an icon sitting in the middle of space, and we have the perfect location. So what we're going to do is come over here to the left side, and we're going to do the second button from the top. Yeah, let me go back here. So Scott, you were talking about the very minor adjustments. Or do you mean like how am I doing these like super subtle nudges like this? Like how am I just nudging it around like very, very small increments? Might be a little bit of a delay until you see this. But if that's what you're talking about, it's not really any secret. This is honestly me. Yeah, I wish I could tell you there's like some magical button I'm hitting, like I'm using my arrow keys on my keyboard. All I'm doing is when I'm holding my left mouse button down, I wish you could kind of see my hand, but I'm just barely moving the mouse. It's like it's moving millimeters on my mouse pad right now. So it's really more of just like a sensitivity thing where I'm just like, you're going to get really good at controlling your mouse hand so you don't overshoot it all the time and move things too wildly. It's just more of like a control thing. There's not really much of a trick to it though. There might be some like things you could do maybe in the Alienware Controls Center to change like the sensitivity of the mouse. Yeah, it's a good question though, because right, if you're in Photoshop, like you can use the arrows to nudge things around. And that's a very good point. Actually, you know what I could do? You just reminded me of something. I'm going to show you something we could do to fix that. Check this out. If we use the button on the left for a split, okay, so we have a split screen. These are two viewports. I'm going to make this one the camera that we're looking through. Let's make this viewport the perspective camera. So watch this. If I bring up the channel box so I can see all the movements, I guess theoretically what you could do here is if you were to hit in the perspective, click on the camera and hit W to translate, you could nudge it by translating that camera in the perspective view and watch how it updates over here. So I can like move it back, move it closer. So if you feel like you're having any like really any issues being super accurate with it over here, you could actually use the transform information by selecting the camera in another viewer and watching it update that way. Because really at this point, it's just like you moving a cube. You just get the benefit of seeing what that camera is looking at the whole time you're moving it. So that could be pretty useful for you. Another way too to move something, I think I do it in not 1.1, but I think I talk about this maybe in week 2. In the channel box, like let's say we want to do translate X on the camera. If you click on an attribute over here, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could totally move that object and watch it update in the other camera. I do this all the time. In fact, when you guys start watching my videos of 1.3, you're going to see me do that all over those videos. I do it in like week 1. I'm doing it in week 2. I do it in the second shading and lighting class. I'm all about that split view. This is one of my favorite things inside of Maya. It's so like simple. It's like a very like basic concept. It probably doesn't seem that crazy, but like it makes it so much easier to work on projects because you can really break up your shots and see what the camera's looking at, but still get the benefit of physically moving the camera like you're on set, grabbing that camera and kind of pushing it back and forth. Yeah, it's really cool. But if another cool way to move something too is if you guys start using the channel box, if you click on like an attribute and you know what direction you want to move it, so let's say we know we want to do a side to side, which is translate X in this case. If you click on an attribute and in the perspective view, hold down your middle mouse button. So I'm currently pushing it on my middle mouse wheel, but see how that translate X is selected? And I'm going to move my mouse left to right. So what I'm basically doing is when you do this, you're clicking on an attribute and you're basically sliding through the values in the channel box just by middle mouse dragging back and forth on the selected attribute. Just like if I clicked on rotate X, which is a little weird because I've turned it so the X is kind of crooked, but that's fine. If I do rotate X, you can see this is my tilt. I'm now using middle mouse on that attribute back and forth to tilt it. So pretty cool stuff. There's a lot of ways to do this. So you guys are going to come up with your own little workflow, and you'll kind of learn what's best for you. Now, when you get to this point where you think you've just absolutely nailed that camera position, be careful you do not accidentally move the camera, because it's so easy to forget this is a locked camera, and you'll be in here like moving around and like, oh, I just ruined my camera position, and then you don't know how to get it back. There actually is a way to get it back, by the way. I just did it. If you nudge your camera by mistake and you want to undo the camera movement, you know how like in most softwares you guys have that Control Z to like the typical undo command in like every software you've probably ever used, Control Z. There is one for the camera, but it doesn't work with Control Z. If you move it through a view, if you look down at your keyboard, look for the minus and the plus key. So if you look right below minus and plus, do you guys see those two brackets like to the right of P? So the left bracket is an undo. That's undo camera movement. Right bracket is redo camera movement. So there's eventually a point where the camera will kind of like stop being able to undo far enough back to get to where you had it. So if you do too much movement, you're not going to be able to get back there. But for the most part, it is a good way to I can sort of use those brackets back and forth to like pop a camera back in position, or maybe compare to two different camera angles to kind of see which one I like better. That's the left and right bracket, again, on the keyboard. What I want you guys to do, though, is when it's perfect, look at the top of the viewer, and you see there's a little camera button with a lock on it. Hit the lock on this camera. Lock it. Look at what's happening in the attribute editor when I do that. Let me do it again. See how like all these could be modified? And then you hit that little lock. Look what's happening right there. There's a gray color popping up. And I'm sure you guys noticed by looking at the padlock that this probably means it's locking the attributes, right? That's kind of what a padlock would do. So it means once you lock it, I'm going to try to go nuts over here and move the camera. I'm alt, left, middle, right mouse button clicking. I'm trying to go crazy and get this thing to break. It will not move. This is locked in place. It will not move until I go in here and actually click that button to unlock it. This is still a relatively new feature. This wasn't in Maya for years, and I have no clue why. We used to have to go through this process of like dragging over attributes, right-clicking, locking them this way to say lock, translate, rotate, scale. Thankfully, they added this now at the top of the viewer, and this makes things a lot easier. But definitely lock your camera. You don't need to lock the perspective. Like this is good, but you do want to lock that guy. And when you lock it, by the way, this also means you can't move it even in here. See how even the little translate manipulator changes color? Because this knows this is a locked attribute, and so even that is graying out for you. It's like, nope, you can't move anything. And if I go in your scene and this is like locked and you get something like this, I'm raining 100s all over that project. This is about as perfect as it can possibly get. All right, let's do this. Let's do it again, actually, a little bit faster. How about that? All right, we're going to blitz through this one. We're going to go up to top. Let's do a create camera. We have our error. We're going to ignore that because everything's fine. And what we're going to do is go in here and double click, rename it character front cam. Okay, so it's all set up. Let's collapse the outliner so I can make some more space again. Hit W. Let's just move it out so you can see it. Oh, by the way, you can make the icons bigger if you want to. If you prefer to see a bigger camera icon, just go over here and bring the scale up. The only thing I want you to do is if you scale up the camera icon, do not scale it in different directions like this. Like don't squash and stretch the camera because it's not just squashing the icon. When you start making the images, you'll see your images end up coming out squashed and stretched. So you want to make sure the scale values are all the same. So I might just drag through that and do a scale of 5 so it's all very even. Click on this, drag through the scale, 5, enter. Now the icon's bigger and we can see it a little bit easier. Now I want to make sure I can see this camera, right? So how did we change this viewer to look through the camera last time? We're still looking through the angled one. At the top, panels, perspective. See how that now shows up? We have our new camera for front. Look through it. And if you want, we could do it like we did before. I could take W, translate it up, and you can see we're just moving the camera into position. Let me load that image up so you can see it. Here's what it looks like. And when you do that, a couple things to note. Notice how, because this is a different camera, it also needs the resolution gate turned on. So we also want to turn it on for this guy, just so you understand what that camera is going to capture. Now you don't need the resolution gate on for the perspective view. This is not helpful because the whole point of the perspective view is it's a working camera. You're just using it really to navigate around and click on things and move stuff around. You don't care about the composition in this view. So you don't need to worry about turning it on here. But we're going to do it all through this. We'll use W. We'll back it up a little bit. Go up. I'm just looking at the gap right here, trying to get that lined up. Pull it back just a bit. That looks pretty darn good. Oh, so yeah, you had a good question, Scott. I just missed this thing. So you were, what Scott's asking about is why am I using underscores? And honestly, it's not really any particular reason. It's more out of just a habit. But when you start getting into naming conventions for different projects, each studio is a little bit different. Each client's going to want things named a certain way. I just do this out of habit. I tend to use an underscore to break up important phrases or words inside of a node. So I typically always do underscore cam at the end, underscore geo, underscore light, underscore, I'm trying to think what else I would even create, underscore particles, underscore curve. That sort of denotes what the thing is that you're clicking on. So I know these are cameras. I know this is geometry. The front part here, you don't have to do the underscore for character underscore angled. Another way I've seen people do it, I'm just going to duplicate this so you can see it. Another popular one would be if you don't have an underscore, they do something like this, where the first couple words are grouped together. The first word is lowercase, and then the uppercase denotes when it gets to the second word. This is, again, it's not really any reason for it. This is just another way that happens a lot in coding. So when you start getting into like coding in with Mel or Python, that's something you're going to get way down the road, like a year from now. When you start getting into coding, you'll see this type of format comes up a lot, where there's like that lowercase, uppercase, and the second word, and they're sort of bunched together. But you guys can come up with your own naming conventions. What I would be careful about is just don't put spaces. The reason I'm not doing a space, because that's probably the bigger issue, something like this, is because, actually space won't even pop up anyway. Maya is forcing the underscore, so that's probably a good sign. But spaces aren't allowed in a lot of softwares because the application doesn't know what a space is. It's not really a character. And so it tends to cause some issues on the back end because it kind of freaks out when it sees the gap. And it's like, I don't know if that's one thing. Is it two things? That's basically all it is. So this just happens to be the way I've been doing it for quite a few years. But yeah, honestly, a lot of this stuff comes down to coding. It's like coders made Maya, and it's a coder's world. So we're just kind of obeying the way they set it up. I just kind of nod my head and say yes. It's all good with me. So this is still fine. But we've already got it there. This looks pretty good. So I'm just going to hit lock on the camera, and we're good to go. So you'll notice that the render settings stuff we did with like the resolution, this pretty much works for both both of these cameras. This is a global scene adjustment. So as soon as you set the render settings for this thing, you are basically able to do both cameras. And you're really just repeating that through the other projects. You go to the vehicle, open the file up, looking at the reference, you're making your cameras. You have a different resolution. This is not 720 by 1080. This is 1280 by 720. So we're making a widescreen for this. Then your dispatch and composition. You're looking at the images. We'll save the scene here in a second so you can see it. I do want to show you the environment though, because we haven't. We're not going to. This doesn't have reference, but I do want you to see how you could kind of manipulate this one. But this one you get to have more creative freedom where you make your cameras. You can just call them Environment Cam 1, Environment Cam 2. Do whatever resolution you want. You guys like the portrait style, you can do that. Like the character, if you want that widescreen, you can totally do that. You can do an extreme widescreen, like the like a Cinemax or there's a lot of different ways to do that. But either way, you can sort of pick your resolution there as well. And what I'm going to do is go over here and let's save the scene. We're going to do the file, save as, and I'm going to put this, I'm going to put it in that same folder, but figure out where you want to save it. Let me see what this was called actually. This is Environment Cam. So what you would do is when you pick save as, don't save over the original, like save scene, do save as. That way you can name it something else. Like click on the character one and just quickly go down here and do _cam, save it, and you're done. So that one will be all set. I think that's pretty much it for the character. Let me show you the environment real quick. We're not going to save any of that because we're rebellious. We know we did it right. So the environment one, we'll go to like a single frame so you can see this. I have the wireframe unshaded currently turned on just so I can see the detail a little bit better. But it's basically the same thing. You know, you figure out where you want your camera to be. You go in here, change your settings, your resolution, create your camera. The main thing with the environment is I just want to make sure you can see the balcony. If you look in the back here, you can see how it looks like you can see through to the back wall. It's because this piece of geometry is using something called backface culling. There's basically not a thickness to it, so it allows us to see through the wall. When you see it from the right angle, it looks like there's a wall there, but when you're looking from the back, you can still see through it. If you guys want to do like an extra camera, like a third camera in here just to play around, like something looking out the window or our amazingly detailed fireplace. Do you like all that detail there? That's clearly not finished. But all these guys look pretty good. So you could, decide if you want to do some type of camera looking out here, and that's also fine. But I do want to make sure we are seeing this with your two main cameras. If you want to do anything beyond that, that's fine with me. You know what? While we're in here, let's actually do simple camera animation before we close out the meeting. I think that'd be kind of fun. So what I'm going to do is make a camera. We get that error again. Not a worry though. We're going to back that up. Let's make the icon a little bit bigger. We'll do maybe 5 again. That look pretty good. So currently the camera is facing the wrong way. So let's do split. Close out of that. Oh, let's rename this as well. We're going to call this animation cam. Okay, let's close out of that. We're going to look through the animation cam. Go to perspective. Okay, let's turn on the resolution gate. And let's set this up kind of like we did for the character. We're going to do, well, actually, we'll do a different one this time, I think. Let's do 1280 by 720. And I'm just going to rotate this around so it's facing towards the scene. So we're going to go to rotate Z, or sorry, not rotate Z, rotate Y, do 180, pivot that around, translate it over, let's back it up a little bit. So I'm kind of doing what we were talking about before, where I could just do most of the movement through my other viewport. And I'm just scaling this over so I can see everything right here. Actually, let's go to full screen because I don't need that character there anymore anyway. Yeah, that works much better. Awesome. Okay. So I want to show you guys a couple of things here with animating a camera. We're going to do a couple of really crazy effects. Let's do a simple one first. So let's go over our basic camera movements here. Okay, so if we look at, where's a good one here? This guy's pretty good. So you're going to get a lot of this in 1.2. So dolly is going to be when you push the camera in and out. Truck is your side to side. So just imagine like facing forward and you're shimmying to the left and right. That's your truck. And then we've also got a pedestal, which is this vertical movement. So between dolly, truck, and pedestal, those are your translate X, Y, Z. We also have pan, which is turning it, like turning your head side to side. Tilt is you looking up and down. And it's not listed here, but there is one called tumble, or it's basically like a barrel roll where you tilt your head side to side. So all that can be done through just keyframing this for our dolly, this for truck. So let's try them out. If you want to do keyframed animation, at the bottom here on the time slider, click around so you can see what your active frame is. And this is way more advanced, by the way. You're not required to do this at all for the submission. But if you guys like watch this and you want to try doing camera animation, I would love to see it. We are going to go to frame 1. So I'm just dragging all the way over here, so I'm on the first frame. And then I'm going to key this in this position. So actually, let's do a truck where we just simply start over here, and then I truck and move past the balcony. So I'm going to go right here so we don't see the edge of the building. I need to key the camera in this position on this frame. So if you're on frame 1, if you your hotkeys for this, you know how WER, or translate, rotate, scale? If you add shift to this, yeah, sure, we'll call it extra credit, Scott. I technically can't give you extra credit, but if it makes you feel better, I will call it extra credit in the critique. But there totally won't be any extra credit. But it will make me very happy. How about that? But if you use WER, if you add shift to it, shift and those same WER hotkeys means it'll keyframe that attribute. It is the thought that counts. You're totally right. So if I do shift W, watch those translate values over there on frame 1. See what happened? You know how before when we did that lock, like they turned gray? Now see how it's popping up with red? And look at the frame down here when I click on the camera. See that little like red tick? That's a keyframe. So this is a very monumental moment in our education. We have set our first keyframe inside of Maya. And it's set there. So this means like if you move the camera, by the way, if I click at the timeline, look what happens. See how it's popping back to that same spot? Because currently there's no other keyframes, and so it sort of thinks this position goes on forever. But what I could do is set the end keyframe. So we're just going to go to the end here. It's at 120 frames, which is fine. We're going to go to 120. I'm going to move the camera over to maybe to right. Let's go to here so we don't see the edge of the building again. And see how that red turned to like a light pink? So this means that there's keyframes on the attributes. We're just not on the actual frame that has the keyframe. We're on a different one. But if I do Shift W, just like we did before, so translate, but it's like adding Shift W, it puts the keyframe on the other end. And see that little blue line that pops up? This is our little animation between the 2 points. And if I hit play, this might be ridiculous. Oh, let's make sure this updates in this one. I'm going to click over here in this view. It was only updating in 1. Let's click on this side. There we go. Look at that. It's movement. And you can see the camera has a little bit of it's called an ease in and ease out. So you're seeing there's like a ramp up where it starts at a standstill and it starts to build momentum, and then it eventually slows down at the end. So that's an ease in and ease out. And if you ever want to see the curves for this, you can also check that out. If you go to Windows, Animation Editors, into Graph Editor, this is jumping way ahead. But over here, if the camera is selected, you actually can see the curves of what that camera is doing. And since we just did like a simple side-to-side truck, you're really only seeing a different value for translate X. The others are still basically the same, but you can kind of see that little ease in it's doing where it builds up speed and then kind of settles in at the end. So this is the graph editor. We're not going to do very much in here though, because this is a little bit too much for the first week. Okay, so let's wipe this out. We're gonna right click on this. I'm just gonna right click on all those guys, and we're gonna do break connection. So that's just gonna remove all the keyframes so they're no longer there. Now we can do the same thing again. I'm gonna do a dolly. So this we're gonna do a push in. So let's pull it back. Frame 1. We're gonna do Shift W. Let's go to frame 120. Push in. Okay, and maybe at the end what we want to do is we're going to go up a little bit as well. So I'm going to find my settled frame here where we're a little bit higher than we were before. Shift W. So let's click on the top here. I don't know if you can see what's happening, but I'm basically clicking in that gray area to select this viewport as opposed to that one. Back up, hit play, and now you're seeing the camera push in and kind of rest and settle at the end right there. And once you guys get better, with animation, you start getting into the graph editor, you'll know how to manipulate the keyframes. So I could like exaggerate a very slow ease out where it really starts to slow down at the end. I could pick up the speed at the beginning. We could push the time farther. So it's not just 120 frames. I might push it to 240. We could double it. A lot of different things we could do. One kind of cool thing too with the dolly, which is kind of fun, is if you also combine that with a focal length adjustment, you can do this really crazy effect where it's like a push-pull, where you're pushing the camera in, but at the same time, you are widening the focal length. So this looks really weird when you do this, but we're gonna check it out here real quick before we get out of here. So on the attributes below the translate, if you come down to focal length, I'm gonna go back here in frame 1, and we are going to, let me just bump this up. Actually, go down yeah, we'll go up a little bit. I just want to zoom in just a bit more. Focal length is a zoom. So let's key, so at 45 for focal length, this looks pretty good. I'm going to do right click, key selected. And then what I'm going to do is when we get here to the end, I'm going to try to find remember that middle mouse thing I was telling you guys where we click on an attribute and then middle mouse drag in the viewer? I'm basically pulling the focal length back until we get something like this. Right click, key. All right, let's see what this looks like. This is a push pull. It's kind of crazy looking. So it's a weird trick where you're changing the camera's distance. Actually, let me stop this. I'm gonna get this to update in both views because you can't really see what the camera's doing in this other viewer real quick. This is something I have to change in my preferences. It is update view all. It's in the time slider. It only does the active view. Let's do both. Yeah, I want you to see what that camera's doing. Actually, yes, it is basically the same thing as field of view. Yep, you totally got it. Yeah, so the field of view it's almost determining how wide, how wide your field of view is, like how far to the side you can see. So the more you zoom in, the less field of view you have, and the more you zoom back, you're widening your field of view. So it's a weird trick where you're pushing in the camera and at the same time opening up and widening your field of view. And so it creates this really weird effect where you squash and stretch stuff. When you guys start going through the videos in 1.2, you're actually going to see this pop up because I think they use it in a bunch of movies, but I know in the first Jaws movie they use it at the way beginning when he's on the beach. There's like this push pull where they kind of zoom back and pushing the camera to his head, and it creates this really weird effect where you're almost like focusing on the character's face. Yeah, it totally elongates the balcony. It's a really nice way to like exaggerate perspective lines. I've used this a lot, not the push pull, but I tend to go with a lower focal length, which is a wider field of view, when I want to do something that's like a miniature. Like if you want to have an ant, like an ant's view, and you want to get these crazy perspective lines of tables where they're like pinching way above you, so tables look like giant towers. You can sort of exaggerate the perspective lines by doing a lower focal length to sort of cheat that effect. And if you do the flip side, if you do a zoom, you're flattening your shapes, and so that could maybe cause something to feel like it's a little bit smaller. Oh, this is totally used in a lot of 80s movies. So if you get into like all those like older 80s nostalgic movies, I mean, this is definitely the move for you. I know just by showing this, I'm going to start getting like half a dozen push-pull animations now with the Environment Project, which is not a bad thing. So you guys could definitely try that out. Um, so I think that's pretty much it. We're already a little over time. I know we started the meeting a little late. So um, do you guys have any questions about any of the stuff from 1.1 or any questions about the things that we're going to be doing in 1.3? Hopefully this all makes sense. But I think starting with cameras is going to be good for you guys because the viewport literally is a camera. So the more you practice creating cameras, moving around in 3D, I mean, you're just setting yourself up to be able to do all the other fun stuff later on. All right, cool. We appreciate it, guys. We'll turn out here. I actually didn't know who was going to show up because it's Halloween. I was surprised to see anybody. Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging out, guys. I'm going to post the link for the live session tomorrow, so you guys will probably see a message about this tomorrow morning. But for now, enjoy the rest of your night, and I will try to catch up with you guys all later in the week. Have a good night.